to talk about these. We are joined by Eugéne Barnard, as I mentioned. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Good evening, Shaprisa. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
No, it's a privilege for us to
Not,
speak to somebody who is, I mean, oftentimes we keep these memories to ourselves, forgetting that memory work is so important, not only preserving culture, but teaching future generations of what their heritage is. So for you, what really brought it together to say, this is where I ought to start, and this is how I'm going to help people see the world that I've lived in, what I see?
yes, well, it all started probably about 15 years ago when I started researching my own ancestry, and I wanted to provide my children and my grandchildren with not a family tree, but a narrative of where we come from and essentially how I came to be what I am. And in the process of telling the story of my own family and how they arrived in the village of Indwe, well, 120, 130 years ago. Yeah, it's about 125 years now. I then realized that there were two stories to be told, and I started researching the history of Indwe and the community who lived there. And I felt an urge. I knew that someone had to tell the story because if no one told the story, the history and the detail would just get lost.
So what
And
stories
that's how
what stories did you
yeah.
see as having to had be told? And if you could also just relate that to how you also got your childhood name of Boysie, and what role it plays in interacting with those two stories.
Yes, well, okay, just a bit of background. In a sense, I have three names, and not three separate identities, but three connotations. My name on my birth certificate is Eugéne, and most people know me by that. When I left school and I went to university, everyone knew me as Eugéne. When I was a baby, I apparently was a very chubby baby, and my grandfather, um, who had a training station, general dealership in Indwe from the early 1900s. He he was fluent in isiXhosa, and he gave me the name Mafuta. So my cousins all knew me as Mafuta, the fat little boy, but I shed that when I was a few years old. And then the third name is the name Boysie. And I was called Boysie for all the years that I lived in Indwe. So anyone I speak to who knew me in those years can relate to the name Boysie. And so when I started writing the story about my family and about the town of Indwe, I felt I had to write it under the pen name of Boysie because all my memories were linked to that name, and the fabric of the town and the community is woven into that name,
I
if
guess then
that
the
makes any
question
sense.
becomes, those three characters, when
Mm-hmm.
they look out from the heart of your home, do they see the world differently, or do those names reflect what you see, from the inside out, the world that you are seeing outside? Because I'm thinking of your generation when you grew up within a community like that. Integration, it would be forced, so to speak, and it's been gradual. But given this particular generation, how they would experience Indwe now would be different. So I just want to see through the window
Mm.
of the eyes of those three characters and how
Yes.
they would reflect Indwe.
Yes. You know, it's been a wonderful process, and the names have converged in a sense because through the research that I've done and just writing about um, my childhood and about the town of Indwe and the community in which I grew up. Um, Given the research, it's really put that into perspective. So the boy Mafuta, or the boy Boysie, um, has now started viewing that history through the eyes of Eugene, and it's made so much sense, so much more sense now. Um, I can. I grew up, as you would know, in the 1950s, 1960s, in a very different world to which we are in today. And I didn't, when you grow up, you think the world in which you've been born into has always been that way and it will always remain that way. But now, being able to look at Indwe as it was before I was born, I've been able to research the Khoisan in the district, the caves, the stories of the Tembu, or the Tambukis as they were known then. They were there before we were there, and how relocations occurred in the late 1800s, in the early 1900s, after the First World War, when relocation had to happen for the sake of the returning soldiers from the First World War. And yes, it's had a wonderful impact on how I view history and the whole process of developing new and fresh understandings.
So how do you view history? I'd like to hear more from you, the transition of those three names. And I'm thinking of architecture
Yeah.
as an
Yes.
explainer, because you spoke
Yeah.
about those times growing up. There's a certain naivete, there's a certain innocence as a child. I mean, if we
Yeah.
look at how houses denote a social structure, strata rather, as children growing up, it was on a very basic level. And I
Yeah.
want to hear from an architect's eye how that story has
Mm.
been told, and not
Mm.
sometimes through design, but also just functionality of those dwellings.
Mm. Maybe I was born with an inclination to want to put things into context, and so as an architect, you always go back to the fundamentals, the foundations, the conditions of the ground, the soil in which you're going to build, the environment in which you design. So try
Okay, you seem to be having
understanding.
a bit of trouble. I definitely wanted to continue this conversation. Let's see if we can attend to it and get you to log in again, because it's a very interesting conversation that our viewers or listeners would like to hear more from. So, okay, I understand that the line has improved. So, you're saying you tend to be pragmatic about your profession and how it informs your worldview.
And also to contextualize the challenges, to look at all constraints that impact design.
Okay, it looks like I was a little bit too optimistic. Let's see if we can get you back, Eugene, speaking to us about his works, 2 volumes written about Indwe.